For over 100 years, the United Kingdom was famously called the workshop of the world, a global powerhouse of industry, coal, and steel. But then, in just a few decades, that entire identity got a complete rewrite. So today, we're going to dig into that incredible transformation from the gritty factory floors to the gleaming trading floors.
So, this is the big question, right? How on earth did a nation literally built on manufacturing pivot so hard towards services, finance, and high tech? It's a really complex story of decline, reinvention, and, the deep social changes that are still shaping the country today.
All right, so our story really kicks off with a slow, kind of painful unwinding of that old industrial economy. The factories, the mines, the shipyards, everything that had defined Britain for generations, they started to face this perfect storm of challenges that would eventually lead to their decline. And there's a key term for this whole process: deindustrialization. Now, this isn't just about a few factories closing down here and there. We're talking about the large-scale shutdown of traditional manufacturing, a fundamental shift away from, making physical stuff. And what was pouring fuel on this fire? Well, globalization. As the world became more and more connected, it suddenly got way cheaper and easier to make things overseas and just import them. This brand new global marketplace put a huge amount of pressure on UK industries. Look, the thing to remember is, this wasn't just one thing. It was that perfect storm I mentioned. You had automation and new machines, meaning fewer workers were needed. At the same time, you've got fierce competition from countries with much cheaper labor. On top of that, the UK's own raw materials, like coal, were starting to run out. Then new environmental laws made things more expensive, and to cap it all off, government policies in the 70s and 80s privatized these massive state-owned industries, which often led to huge job losses. But here's the thing. As the smokestacks fell silent, something new was beginning to rise. This wasn't the end of the UK's economy, not by a long shot. It was actually the birth of a profoundly different one, built on completely new foundations.
So the big question is, if the factories and mines are disappearing, what takes their place? Where did people find new kinds of work? The answer, as we'll see, lies in a complete restructuring of the economy.
And wow, this chart right here just shows you how dramatic that shift has been. Just look at this breakdown. A massive 79%, almost 4/5 of the UK's entire economic output now comes from the service industry. That's everything from retail and banking to healthcare. Now compare that to manufacturing, which is down to just 14%, and stuff like farming and mining, a tiny 1%. It's a complete economic flip.
And this has a name. We call it a post-industrial economy. The focus shifts from making physical goods to providing services and managing information. Think about it. Instead of steel mills, you get skyscrapers in the City of London. Instead of coal mines, you get cutting-edge science parks and a booming tech scene.
But, and this is a huge but, this massive economic earthquake didn't affect everyone in the same way. The transition created some really clear winners and some really clear losers, leaving behind a legacy of inequality that the UK is still wrestling with today.
And you can see here, for those old industrial heartlands, the consequences were, they were just devastating. When the main employer in town, say a mine or a factory, shut its doors, it created this awful domino effect. Mass unemployment meant people had no money to spend, so local shops and businesses went under. Young people had to move away to find work, and in these areas, sadly, health got worse and crime rates often went up.
But on the flip side, other parts of the country absolutely thrived. They attracted these new high-tech businesses. They're sometimes called footloose industries because, unlike a coal mine, they aren't tied to one spot. They can pretty much set up shop anywhere. And they often chose to cluster around major universities to get access to all that fresh talent and research, creating these modern science and business parks, usually connected by new motorways. These areas basically became magnets for skilled workers and foreign investment.
And all of this uneven growth carved out what is probably the UK's most famous and persistent economic fault line, the North-South divide. It's really become a kind of geographic shorthand for the deep-seated inequalities that came out of this period of change. And this really lays it out in black and white, doesn't it? In the North, you generally saw higher unemployment, slower population growth, and lower wages. In the South, it was the exact opposite: higher employment, faster growth, and much higher wages. This massive gap created what a lot of people call a tale of two Britons, all living within one country. So, the obvious question is, what's being done about all this?
Well, in recent years, there has been a major focus on trying to bridge this gap and kind of rebalance the UK's economy. Okay, so one of the big ideas that's been front and center is the Northern Powerhouse Initiative. The basic thinking is pretty simple. If you can better connect the great cities of the North with modern transport, and you invest in future-focused industries like science and tech, you can create a second economic hub to rival London and the Southeast.
So, how is this supposed to work? Well, it's kind of a multi-step plan. First, you pour billions into transport to get the North cities better connected. Second, you create these special enterprise zones with tax breaks to tempt new businesses to set up there. Third, you encourage those businesses to cluster around hubs of innovation, like universities. The ultimate goal is to kickstart something called the multiplier effect, where one new high-tech job, for example, then creates several other jobs for caterers or cleaners or local shopkeepers, boosting the entire local economy.
But the real question is, does any of this actually work? Well, take a look at this number, over 1,000. That's the number of jobs created at just one new factory, the Siemens wind turbine blade facility in Hull. It's a fantastic example of how targeted investment in green technology can bring high-skilled jobs back to an old industrial port and really help revitalize the whole area.
And all of this leaves us with one big final question. The UK has gone through a monumental economic shift. It's created incredible wealth and innovation, for sure, but also deep, lasting divisions. As the efforts to bridge that north-south gap continue, the fundamental challenge is still there. Can a divided economy ever truly be a united kingdom?